Welcome to Explore Women's Health with NG Bio, the podcast where science, capital, and conviction come together to rewrite the future of healthcare. I'm Dr. Deniz Bakkalcı, a scientist and investor leading Women's Health at NG Bio. Explore cuts through the noise to bring you straight into the minds of founders, researchers, and investors shaping the future of this field. And I couldn't think of a better guest to kick things off with than someone who bet on women's health before most people were even paying attention. Dr. Anula Jayasuriya is a force in healthcare investing. She's a physician, molecular pharmacologist, Harvard MBA, and the founding GP of Exclaim Capital, one of the very first VC funds dedicated solely to women's health. She's also co-founder and managing director at Kidron Capital, an investment vehicle focused on high-impact opportunities across healthcare and life sciences. Through both funds, Anula has backed many companies that are pushing the boundaries of what's possible in underserved health categories. Anula, thank you for being here. I'm genuinely honored to start this series with someone who's helped shape this space from the ground up.
Deniz, I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
Of course. We know that you lived at the intersection of medicine, science, and capital. But if you had to introduce yourselves without your job titles, who are you in the women's health space?
I think I'm a reframer and a catalyst. I was very early in articulating both the gap and the opportunity in women's health. I pushed the narrative from conversations on impact and the research gap to the business opportunity, from charity to capital, from niche to wow, as I like to say. And I highlighted the transformative role of early stage venture capital in this nascent field. It is a very large and diverse category, women's health, that is, spanning many conditions, treatment modalities, business models, regulatory pathways. There are many stakeholders: women, society, economy, pharma, doctors, healthcare providers. It's a lot of people. It's half the population of the world. And so it's a big and challenging topic that we are addressing today.
I really love that. A reframer. That's what this space has needed. Someone to push it from important to investable. And you've done that consistently. I know that you backed women's health before it was hot. Was it conviction, frustration, or both? Like, what's lit the fire for you and what's keep it burning?
So you're right. It was frustration lit the match. It was a huge problem to me, hiding in plain sight. I couldn't understand how I, trained in medicine at one of the best institutions in the world, Harvard, and how could I not have realized the gap and the problems earlier? And then I was able to get beyond that and look at the future and see the vast potential as an opportunity. So I became somewhat of a reluctant but active zealot.
I think that really hits because once you see the gap, you can't unsee it. And it's often frustration with the system, with the silence, which then sparks real action from us. And I feel that personally too. I've spent years in science and now in investing, and I've seen and felt how deep the gaps go. It's not just professional for me, and there's a personal link too. I do have PCOS, and I did really struggle between diagnosis and how to manage it. And I genuinely think there's a gap in primary data and also analyzing the data. Can you give an example for this problem?
For the gap in the data, yes, I can give you the example of postpartum hemorrhage, and known as PPH. So the perception in the US was that there wasn't a problem with postpartum hemorrhage here, that it was a problem in the developing world, from countries like India and Sri Lanka, where I'm from, and other under-resourced economies. So it was very hard when Alidia, a company that had a transformative solution for postpartum hemorrhage, was trying to raise money in the US. The thought was, oh, this is not going to make any money because the first world doesn't need it, and it's going to be for the developing world. The major step that the CEO took was collecting data on the incidence of postpartum hemorrhage. And so she set out to interview many GYNs and obstetricians, actually. And she collected this data, which made her able to raise money. Originally from people who were more interested in cross-border investing, but later on with mainstream business return-focused investors. And this company, which didn't raise a lot of money, was able to be sold to Organon, an exit that was a very attractive multiple.
So that's a very interesting example, and I think we need to talk about these a lot more. So I'm really grateful that you brought that up. Now, just moving towards a bit more strategy and vision within Women's Health. If you could fund one category in Women's Health for the next 5 years, what would it be, and what would you ignore that others are chasing?
So I'm not sure how you're defining category, whether you're meaning the modality. In other words, is it a device, drug, diagnostic, so on and so forth, or is it a disease area? I'm going to take the view that you mean both. So I'm going to answer both by saying that the gap is greatest in the therapeutics area for obvious reasons, because therapeutics takes a lot of time, a lot of infrastructure, and a lot of money. So most of the innovation in women's health to date has been in digital health, in medical devices, in diagnostics, in providing care, access to care, and the biggest gap is in therapeutics. And also the biggest gap is in therapeutics for common chronic diseases such as cardiac disease, autoimmune, neurodegeneration, mental health, longevity and aging, etc. So I would double down on therapeutics. And what would I de-emphasize? There's nothing in women's health yet that doesn't need to be looked at and invested in. However, I would de-emphasize what is known as traditional women's health, which is reproductive and maternal health, because it has garnered a lot more attention. There's a lot more data there, and there are more investors there.
Absolutely. And yes to everything you've said. I think people forget that most conditions affect women differently, not just fertility or hormones. And then I think the next big play might not look like traditional women's health at all. And I know that you've seen countless pitches. What's something founders often get wrong when trying to build or raise for women's health, and what separates the truly fundable few?
So the reality is the bar is higher for women's health. And in women's health, it's higher for female entrepreneurs. There are data that suggest that men who are leading companies serving women's health can raise more money and more quickly than women can. And that's not surprising. Most investors are men. They don't have the lived experience of being a woman. And therefore, it's more challenging for them to understand the importance and the transformative potential of women's health innovation. So I'm not blaming them. I'm just saying entrepreneurs have to accept this. So it's also, I think, very important to understand the difference between an inventor, innovator, somebody who wrote the patent, who came up with the idea, and the entrepreneur. One is doing the technical part, and the other is basically building the business, raising the money, commercialization, exits. And they're different skills. People often confuse the two. And I bring this up primarily in women's health because what has happened is that a lot of the innovation in women's health has been a grassroots, bottom-up trend where women have noticed a need in their unmet need in their own lives and have then come up with an innovation based on their own unmet need and then become an entrepreneur as well. And so many women have been in the state where they've become both the inventor and the innovator. And I think it's very important there to understand whether one is capable of both or whether one needs to have separate the two skills and seek that duality. And then not to compromise the passion of the innovator, the woman's voice in how I got here and why I came up with this invention that is born from my own complete understanding of the problem as a patient, from the ability to articulate the value proposition to VCs who may not understand it firsthand, and then the whole commercialization process and company building process. Another thing to think about is, because women's health has stalled for decades, there are big gaps in the building blocks of innovation, such as animal models, regulatory pathways, business models, commercialization paths, reimbursement. I can go on. And that also needs to be innovated. And sometimes that's a bit of there's a lot of uncertainty there. So when I look at a company, in addition to the market opportunity, I pay a lot of attention to what novel pathways have to be created, or what has to be disrupted in order to break through into a market. How do you create a market? And do people understand how the barriers to doing that and the obstacles, and then have they have the fortitude to actually change it and the ability to pivot as needed? And a lot of times that is a weak link. I'm also very focused on competition to understand the space. So, ironically, after years of a barren landscape, if you look at endometriosis and ovarian cancer as two examples, all of a sudden there are over 10 diagnostic companies in each of these fields, and they're all pretty much at the same stage in development and would come to the market at the same stage. And that's sort of a paradox, because you don't expect that kind of competition in much of women's health, but it's an area where I see that. Urinary incontinence is another one, and menopause management is another one. They become crowded spaces. However, they're not filling all the gaps. So I think it requires really understanding the value proposition and differentiation in these markets that are competitive. So I really want to know the hook, the differentiator, and I want those entrepreneurs to be able to articulate how they are going to succeed with enough of the market. And then in women's health, I think also leadership is really important. The leader, the CEO, needs to be able to tell a story that inspires a potentially skeptical investor. And that, I think, is also a very important skill, because, if you're talking about prostate cancer, you don't have to tell everyone why prostate cancer is important. That story, that hook, is not as important. Those are the things that I look for.
I think everything you said are very, very important. Particularly, I think vision without execution won't cut it here, especially when you're building something investors still don't fully understand. And yes, it's not just about being different, it's about being unignorable when it comes to women's health, I guess. And a lot of VCs talk about impact, but how do you personally draw the line between meaningful health outcomes and measurable financial returns? Can we really have both?
It's a very good question. I believe that in women's health, you can have both. However, I believe to make a really sustainable change, you have to lead with business, because you don't want to live in the realm of charity. Charity is not self-funding, not self-sustainable in general. And so my interest is in that sustainability, which is then deeply tied to business success. And so I believe that almost anything one does in women's health, because it's so lacking, delivers impact and benefit. The reality is that women's healthcare is far behind. It's not commensurate with current advances in medical science. And a lot of women who are wealthy have the impression that it's purely a matter of access, that if they can pay and go to the best centers in the US, academic centers, for example, that they can access the best care. Yes, they can fix the access problem, but the access problem is a different one from the problem of, does that care even exist? And I would say that even the wealthiest person woman in the world with the greatest access does not have a great solution for endometriosis or PCOS, for example, because they don't exist. And I think that's a very important point.
Yes, and the more we lead with returns, the faster we get resources to actually deliver impact. And currently
That's exactly right. Exactly right.
And currently, most women's health focused funds are small, therefore limited by what they can invest in. Imagine someone offered you a large fund tomorrow, no strings attached. What overlooked problem would you solve in women's health and how?
This is a wonderful thing to contemplate. Thank you. So let me dream. I want to build a bold and ambitious therapeutics focused fund that can really transform the women's health landscape. And McKinsey has highlighted this. Women spend 25% more of their lives in a state of disability compared to men. And this is really due to the differential impact of common chronic diseases, you know, Alzheimer's, rheumatoid arthritis, cardiac disease, and so forth in men and women, right? So, but men and women have not been studied separately for the most part. I can give you the Alzheimer's drug developed by Biogen that didn't have good clinical results. It was found that it didn't work in women, but it hadn't been tested in women, even though the prevalence and incidence both of Alzheimer's disease is twice as much in women. So you'd think that you would actually try to understand that difference, but no. So sex has not been used as a biological variable. So my question is, what can tech, in particular AI and other technology, do to help us have a moonshot effort at transforming women's health? So something other than creating the animal models, using the traditional method, which takes years. Is there some way that we can leapfrog and get to the same point very quickly? And I am not an AI expert. In fact, I'm an AI novice. But I do wonder what the promise of the intersection of AI and women's health holds. Could it be a game changer, or could it also be a destroyer, because hardwiring of biases could also be a negative. So I think it's a double-edged sword. And I'm interested in looking at what can be done. Can we, for starters, look at all the data that were collected in pharmaceutical trials that enrolled men and women, but didn't test them or analyze them differently. Now, yes, I understand they weren't powered for looking at the differences, so on and so forth. But can we just take a look? Are there statistical advances that we can use to fix that? Previously, the answer was it's just too expensive. It takes too long. But can AI solve that part of the problem? Are there synthetic data that we could create to fill some of these gaps? Are there digital twins? Is there a smarter clinical trial design going forward? Can we close this primary and secondary data gap? And I would really want to also look at animal models. They are a big roadblock for therapeutics, for example. Can we use organoids? I know that's something you know something about. And today the FDA is echoing that idea. So that's, I think, also exciting. So I would craft a investment strategy looking at what tech can do to amplify and expedite therapeutics designed for women.
Yeah, that's such a clear thesis, not just about investing in companies, but investing in catching up with the science as well. And the idea of using AI not just to accelerate, but also correct the system. And that's the whole category waiting to happen, I think. And I know that you've been in rooms most of us never get into. What's one uncomfortable truth about the investment world that women's health founders should know early?
Even today, it's likely to be tougher to get funding and to have a successful exit, because it's not just the entry. The exit is even more important in women's health. And the exit is difficult for different reasons than the entry. The entry is hard because of getting money and being credible while being considered. The exit is because the exit opportunities, the options, the pool is small, is constrained, right? So you are limited on both ends, the entry and the exit. And I think at this point, just take it as a given and don't let that distract you. Just, you know, work as around it. And my hope and what I'm trying, what and a lot of us are trying to do is to change that reality. The flip side is that the magnitude of contribution that one can have is much, much greater if one perseveres and succeeds. So one becomes a real pioneer as opposed to a me too, I did another drug for whatever disease. You really are transformative. And that's very exciting. I also want to make some like little points, like be patient with male investors. There's no point being frustrated, and use analogies. For example, McKinsey uses the analogy that endometriosis and also PCOS are about as prevalent as diabetes. And look at the difference in the awareness and the investment and the business opportunity in diabetes compared to these two. So use those kinds of analogies that help people who aren't thinking about these areas open their minds. And also, if there are words, anatomical words like vagina, I think we can now say vagina quite easily in business meetings. But there was a time not too long ago where that was very uncomfortable both for the person saying it and the person listening. And also, but don't always assume that it's going to be comfortable. And I think more than anything else, practice saying it yourself so that you are not uncomfortable saying it, because your lack of comfort of whatever words can be contagious. At all times, just don't lose one's cool, because be patient but persistent, and emphasize the business prospects, and you don't have to compromise your own passion if you're a woman who came up with something because of their own experience, but connect the dots to the business opportunity. Don't stop at the passion, and be very, very well prepared and detailed, especially on the business side.
Yeah, I think we need to normalize the conversation here, be unapologetic, but also we need to show up with clarity and confidence, as you say. Yeah, very,
And
very great
patience,
tips.
and some
Patience.
patience. Yeah.
Exactly. And finally, what's something you wish you had chance to say to people in this field, but you haven't yet? What do they need to hear right now?
I say this from my heart. This isn't politics. This is about precision medicine for everyone. This is about delivering 21st century care for women, and it doesn't come at the cost to men's health. This is not zero sum. If we remove the noise of studying two groups that are different as one, we get a better signal for each one if studied separately, and it's positive for all. That's what I wish to emphasize.
I think that's a beautiful wrap. It's not about taking space, it's about upgrading the entire system. And women's health is the lens that brings clarity to the whole field, in my opinion. And Anula, thank you so much for not just for your insights, but for everything you've pushed forward. And this conversation set the bar. And I really appreciate your time with us early in the morning in Bay Area, actually.
I'm delighted to have had this opportunity. Thank you for choosing me.
To our listeners, this is exactly why we launched Explore, because women's health is a niche. It's the growth story of our time. I'm Dr. Deniz Bakkalcı, and this is Explore with NG Bio. Hit follow button, share it forward, please, and stay with us as we meet the people rewriting the rules of healthcare.